Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into what is arguably criminology's very first intellectual revolution. We are looking at a truly dramatic and frankly fascinating shift in human history. We're talking about the massive leap from terrifying superstitions to the concept of rational choice. This idea, it's the absolute bedrock of almost every modern legal system on Earth. So to really grasp how justice operates today, we absolutely have to understand how we got here. Okay, picture this. Imagine a world where crime was blamed entirely on demonic possession. Under that old demonological theory, do you know what the preferred cure was? Trepanation. Yes, literally drilling a hole into a living person's skull to let the evil spirits out. Thankfully, we got a massive paradigm shift. Enlightenment philosophers finally stepped in and argued that, hey, criminals aren't actually possessed by demons. They're simply everyday people making rational, calculated choices. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover justice before classical theory, Beccaria and rational actors, the pleasure and pain principle, the flaw of rigid law, and finally, the neoclassical compromise. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Justice before classical theory, the Dark Ages of the 18th century.
So, to really appreciate the change, we need to look at the terrifying reality of European criminal justice before the year 1764. The old system was, quite literally, a nightmare. Imagine walking into a courtroom where your punishment relied entirely on the arbitrary, unpredictable whim of the judge. And torture? That wasn't some rare exception. It was just the routine way they extracted confessions. People were getting the death penalty for incredibly minor thefts. There was zero logic involved, just raw retribution acting as the brutal residue of those old demonological beliefs. Moving on to Section 2, Beccaria and rational actors, the father of classical criminology. That brutal backdrop perfectly explains why Italian philosopher Cesare Beccaria was an absolute game-changer. In 1764, he wrote a desperately needed book called On Crimes and Punishments to try and humanize this whole mess. His core assumption was the rational actor. He insisted, look, there are no spiritual forces making people commit crimes. A human being is just an ordinary person holding a mental scale in their head, constantly weighing the potential benefits of a crime against its likely costs. If the reward outweighs the risk, they offend. It's just a pure calculated business decision. So how do you actually stop a rational actor? Beccaria came up with 3 rigid pillars of deterrence. First, laws have to be clearly written in advance. Boom, no more arbitrary judge whims. Second, the punishment must be proportionate, meaning no more severe than absolutely necessary. And third, consequences have to be swift and certain. Beccaria figured out that a fast, highly guaranteed consequence deters people way better than some super harsh punishment that's probably never going to happen. Just like that, the entire purpose of justice flipped from getting revenge to actually preserving public safety. All right, Section 3, the pleasure and pain principle. Bentham's utilitarianism. Enter English philosopher Jeremy Bentham. He basically took Beccaria's practical legal ideas and wove them into this much broader philosophical system. Bentham introduced what he called the pleasure-pain principle. He argued that literally all human behavior is driven by one thing, maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain. It's a hedonistic calculus. So, applied to crime, Bentham said if the state wants to prevent offenses, it just needs to make sure the pain of the legal punishment reliably outweighs whatever pleasure the offender gets from committing the crime. It's basic math. And this brilliant logic wasn't just some passing trend in the 1700s. This is the intellectual root of deterrence theory today. It remains absolutely central to criminal justice policy everywhere. When you hear modern debates over harsh sentencing for things like drug trafficking or terrorism, the state is explicitly using Bentham's logic. They are trying to deter future rational offenders by promising them certain severe pain. Which brings us to Section 4, the flaw of rigid law, when theory meets reality. As beautifully logical as classical theory sounds on paper, it ran into a massive, undeniable problem when it actually hit the courtrooms. Under strict classical theory, punishment is fixed rigidly by the law, meaning judges have zero discretion. So think about this, a cold-blooded, premeditated adult murderer and a child acting in self-defense. Actually, wait, that sounds crazy, but yes, they would receive the exact identical penalty for homicide. Why? Because the offense on paper is the exact same. Obviously, real-world cases quickly proved that this one-size-fits-all approach produced terribly unjust outcomes. Classical theory had a glaring blind spot. It had absolutely zero room for individual circumstances. A person's mental state, their age,
or their true intent.
Section 5. The Neoclassical Compromise, bringing balance to the scales. This severe tension between rigid, unbending laws and actual human complexity birthed the Neoclassical Compromise. And it's a brilliant middle ground. The Neoclassical reforms kept that foundational assumption that offenders are generally rational actors. But they totally scrapped the one-size-fits-all rule. They brought back what's called bounded judicial discretion. This meant judges could once again look at the actual human being sitting in front of them and weigh mitigating factors like age, mental capacity, and specific circumstances. It injected necessary human flexibility right back into a fixed legal structure. And we can see this exact compromise embedded in modern legal systems globally today. Take Pakistan's legal framework, for instance. You can see the neoclassical model at work right now. Laws like the Juvenile Justice System Act formally recognize that minors have reduced culpability. The courts also recognize categories of diminished responsibility, allowing judges to weigh all sorts of mitigating circumstances at sentencing. It proves that individual context matters deeply, even within a strict legal framework. So where is all this theory today? Well, the most direct modern descendant is rational choice theory. It keeps the core idea of a criminally motivated offender making a calculated decision, but it zooms way in on the exact process behind that choice. If you were the offender, what information would you actually have at the exact moment of the crime? What risks would you perceive? What alternatives would you think you had? This modern framework is literally why everyday crime prevention looks the way it does. The next time you see improved street lighting, visible security cameras, or reinforced locks, remember, they aren't there to change a criminal's soul. They work by instantly tipping that rational scale. They directly increase the perceived effort and risk right at the moment a person is deciding whether or not to offend. It's basically classical theory applied to city planning. We've covered an incredible journey today, from drilling holes in skulls to the rational, calculated scales of justice we rely on now. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question to help you analyze the justice system operating around you right now. Based on what we just explored, does a system like Pakistan's current sentencing framework lean closer to the rigid deterrence of strict classical thinking, or has it fully embraced the flexible, mitigating approach of the neoclassical model? Really think about it, and notice how these centuries-old philosophies are still actively shaping our world today. Thanks for exploring this with me.